In our previous lessons, we have seen how we use attributes to give elements some additional information. Now, we are going to discover the use of class and ID attributes. HTML class attributes. Class, which is a short for classification, is an HTML attribute that specifies classification for an HTML element. We have this file opened, classes_css.html. Now, we say the class stands for classification. So, say we have several span tags with content. This is a span tag 1. Then I duplicate this into 3 places. So we have here to be 2, and here as 3. With these 3 span tags, though they are all span, we can actually begin to give them some group or classification using the class attribute. We have these 3 span tags and we want to classify some of them or group them into a classification that we can use to style them later or use them in JavaScript. Now, I can say the first and the last span class, let's call the class GRE for the first and the last, while the class for the second one should be BLU. So, as it stands now, span A and span C all belong to the same class GRE, while span B belongs to a class BLU. Multiple HTML elements can share the same name. An HTML element can have more than one classification. So, let's say we want to change display properties. So, let's give it a class of DP. Now, DP and DP. So, as you can see, we now have 2 classes inside one span tag. Let us move to styling these tags. And we'll use the style tag inside the style tag. To access the GRE class, we do the period, then GRE, then curly braces. Then within the curly braces, we put a property. So the property we want to have there is background color of green. So at the end of each property value pair, we put a semicolon. Then I also want to add a property for the BLU, curly braces. Inside the curly braces, I want to do a background color of blue. Then to style the DP, here I want to change the display property. So I give them display property of block, since their default property is actually span. So when I save this and open it in my browser, as you can see, we now have the total span tag, the 3 of them, now having a display property of block. That's why you see them taking up a whole line. Then the first tag, span, GRE, and the third span tag has GRE also. So you can notice that they both have green color, while the second span tag, which had the BLU class, is now having a background color blue. So that is how we use the class to change the properties and value of a particular HTML element inside our style tag or inside our CSS. HTML class attribute can also be used to do some modifications using JavaScript. So we create a JavaScript span tag, and in tag, let's have this function. So this function is going to look through our code, look for items with the class of BLU, and give it a style of display none. That means it shouldn't have any display. So let's call the function to display just as the page is loading. So we go to our browser and refresh. So after refreshing, we notice that the span tag with the BLU class is not seen. That is because if we inspect our element, you see that it is there, but it has been added, it has been given a display property of none. As you can see here, it has been given a display property of none. So if we remove this here and refresh, you see that our tag is showing visible, but we'll put it back using JavaScript, it disappears. So that is how we use the class attributes. Let's now look at the HTML ID attribute. The ID attribute specifies a unique identifier for an HTML element. The value of an ID must be unique within the HTML document. So now we can only have one unique ID attribute. In this span, we use ID is equals to GRE. We cannot use the same ID again in the next item or any item whatsoever inside this same page. Instead, we should give another name. The reason is ID must have a unique value. So let's look at how to use the ID attribute. The ID attribute is used to point to a specific style declaration in CSS markup. It can also be used in JavaScript to access and control the behavior elements with the specific ID. Since they are unique, they cannot be used in more than one element or in multiple places like the class attribute. Let's do some styling with ID. So to style using the ID, we first use the pound sign or hash, as it is called now, and say the name of the ID, which is GRE. Let us change the font color to white and let's give it a padding of 10 pixels. So let us save this and open in browser. Let's take this out for now. So as you can see in my browser now, the first span, which has an ID of GRE, now has text of white, and if you can see, the space around the text is the padding. The space around the text is the padding. So we have been able to add some style using the ID attributes. ID attribute can also be used in JavaScript. So let's create another function and call it my ID function. Let's do something similar to what we had before. So var x is equals to document dot. So previously we used document.get element by class name, but now we use document.get elements by ID. Then we put the ID name inside parentheses, and the ID we're looking at is GRE. Then at the end we close it. So we say what do we want to do to var? So we want to change the style. So we'll say x.style.display. Let's change it. Let's change the background color. Sorry. Dot background color. Let's say it is equal to, in parentheses, RGB 91 240 240, and close it, and we can save this. Then we have to call the function, so we do this, and let's call it at the top there. So when we open this in our browser and refresh, you see the background color changes because we have been able to use JavaScript to change the background color. Let's also change the text color. Let's change the text color to black. So as you can see, the text color has also been changed to black. So this is how we use class and ID in our HTML elements to give them some special classification or special marker so that we can be able to use them to do styling in our CSS, or to also you do some behavioral changes using JavaScript.